Um, welcome, everybody. Um, I woke up or was half asleep in the middle of the night, and I was working on what I wanted to say or have us talk about this morning. And what came to me is that I'm really trying to develop a model for dealing with conflict. And then I thought, I can't do that. Who am I to do that? Here we're swimming in conflict. There's such incredible conflict all around us and in us and between us um, in our world, in our communities, in our families, inside us, in our partnerships. And here I'm sitting, or in the middle of the night, I was lying in my comfortable bed, and thinking that I was wanting to develop a new model or a model for conflict. And then I thought of Obama's book, The Audacity of Hope. And I thought we need that audacity. We all need to develop models for dealing with conflict. I love meeting new people in the neighborhood, and I met this young man in the coffee house, the coffee club, and was talking with him, and somehow we started talking about the Middle East and how his friends are with that. And he was saying, well, we really don't talk about anything like that. It's too dangerous. We can't talk about it. And as we spoke, he was sharing how it was a relief to talk to me, this this stranger who isn't in his world, but that within his world, people just have given up talking about what's important in the world because it's just too difficult and people can be too offended. And I was thinking, oh no, this isn't the way for us to go. But I've noticed it also in my circles that people just can't talk about things anymore because it just ends up with everybody mad at each other and feeling misunderstood. And so I was really looking forward to talking about it with you, and our being able to just think a little further about these issues and these problems. And when I'm talking about conflict, I'm talking about loads of things all at once. And we may say that's silly to talk about war and to talk about racism and to talk about an argument I had with my partner and to talk about two cats not getting along, all in the same thing. But there are relationships, and we are systems within systems within systems. And I believe that that talking about conflict is most useful when we go back and forth between the conflict within us to the conflicts in the world to the conflicts in our community, and see how they're connected and not treat them as all very, very different, which they are, of course, also. So I want to start us out with something that I came across. As many of you know, I'm a psychoanalytic therapist as well as a focusing oriented therapist. And Heinz Kohut is the founder of self-psychology and a kind of relational psychoanalysis that I find very useful. And he and Jean, by the way, were at the University of Chicago together, and they never really talked to each other because they were in these two different worlds, which is sort of another subject, but kind of related. So I came across this this quote of his, and I want to read it to you, but it's hard to take when you're half asleep and the beginning of our discussion. So take a couple of breaths and let's see if we can find a place for this quote within ourselves without it overwhelming us or discouraging us or disheartening us. I think we have to be re-hearted. I think many of us have been disheartened, and facing the reality of conflict can feel like it further disheartens us, and we don't want that. So we have to take some breaths and say, oh, we can deal with Kohut this morning. Okay, Dorothy, are you going to read Kohut? I think
Yeah.
Jim
Yeah.
is. Okay.
Man is in danger. He may be on the verge of destroying himself. He cannot control his cruelty toward his fellow man. He appears to be forced to respond to differences of opinion or conflicts of interests in one mode only, through the mobilization of his readiness to fight and to destroy. The mere otherness of others frightens and disgusts him. And so powerfully impelling is the influence of these feelings on him that he would rather risk total destruction than bear the burden which an attitude of tolerance toward the demands of his fellow men and the temporary renunciation of his own demands and of his own pride would impose on him.
Let's just have a couple of brief responses of just what that feels like in you, including disagreement, anything that comes, but just a sentence, because we have a long way to go this morning.
Lynn, this is an essay. It reminds me the quote of like maybe 2 months before the pandemic, a friend came to visit and we went to Woodstock to hang out. And Woodstock is a really cool place to kind of hang out in. And they had a sign in the street with, flowers and stuff. And we took pictures there. And then I realized that the sign said, the humans are an endangered species.
Oh, yeah.
And this quote kind of reminds me of that, but also I won't go too much into it, but also I want to kind of rebuttal it, kind of like say no to it, part of me. So I seek spaces that create hope for me, not the negativity. So because the world is right now in a way like he's describing, like spaces that I go to, there's a lot of conflict like you described. And these are therapists. And I'm like, oh my God, therapists cannot get along right now. It's like people have real huge opinions. And also I've noticed that negativity creates more engagement than anything positive or calm. So I've been looking a lot at the work of Thomas Hubble, and I'm in his like mystical spiritual journey this year, only because he has the opposite of that. He's all about collective healing, about nurturing spaces, and his work reminds me a lot of what you're doing, Lynn, and what we're doing here, which is creating these nurturing spaces for collective healing.
Thank you, Anesi.
My reaction to that quote, what that engenders in me is a feeling of something intolerable that has to be controlled and suppressed. That
Mm.
kind of energy is something that
Mm.
can't be born, and then it goes out in an aggressive way.
That's a beautiful description of that felt sense of something intolerable that has to be controlled, and it goes out in an aggressive way.
It frightens me, but it also draws me to want to make something different, to make some changes. So what you were saying, Annecy, draws me very strongly to wanting to be a tiny little piece of that.
Mm, mm. Well, Kohat was Kohat was one of the people who escaped from the Nazis, but he didn't actually actively escape. His followers had to almost kidnap him because he couldn't believe that he was in terrible danger in Vienna. And he's older than Jean, but they both were in Vienna, and he ended up in Chicago, and it was like a whole complete change for him. He was, at that time, he was an established psychoanalyst, and he changed his whole way of thinking and working when he was trying to incorporate these new people, these Americans, and what had happened to him. And Freud's idea that he followed was that we are driven, we have these drives of sex and aggression that have to be controlled. We have to learn how to what Freud said is, where id was, these instincts, ego shall be. We have to learn to be rational and control these things. And Kohat sort of slowly and not quite willingly said, this doesn't really make sense. What made sense to him was that that people absolutely desperately need their connectedness with other important people to them. And that when those bonds are broken, that it's like an umbilical cord being broken. This terrible rupture in the sense of self. And that the aggression that comes is a byproduct of that terrible harm to the self. And he talked about narcissistic rage as something very different than anger, that this kind of rage that he was talking about, the rage that comes from the broken self, is a desperate attempt to get oneself back together, to feel oneself as whole, to feel like we're back in control of something. And he called that narcissistic rage endless hatred and lust for revenge. And that's what he was talking about in that quote. But to change that around was an amazing kind of thing. And of course, Jane Genlin was working also on this sense that it's the experience, the experience of self that we need to be whole in order to be able to relate. I'm thinking about Gene Genlin's fitting in, pouring out, and relating. And he says that in our societies, we've only learned fitting in and pouring out, but we haven't learned relating yet, and that we shouldn't be discouraged. It's sort of the growing edge of evolution. So I think that the positive way of thinking about it is we're getting there. The negative way of thinking about it that Kohut was talking about is we may not get there soon enough. We might destroy ourselves before we get to this next evolutionary step. But there's a sense of direction that we have to learn something that is more than control or different than control. And we've depended on control mostly in our societies. And it isn't working. And yet we're desperately trying to find ways of controlling the situation. So I think the alternative that Gene and Kohut were talking about is something more about healing and understanding than about control. But that's certainly easier said than done. I think of a couples therapy presentation that I heard 50 years ago or something. And this presenter was saying that the strength of a couple is determined by the way they fight. And I thought that was so interesting. And I think that might be of a species also. The strength of the species, this endangered species that we are, is about, the ways that we fight. So we could think that with a couple, we can get our minds around that a little bit better. What are the things that would make a good fight? A good fight, not fighting at all and sort of suppressing, fitting in and suppressing all of the conflicts that everybody has in being a human, being a couple, being whatever. So what do you think of as a good fight?
Lynn,
Yeah,
it's
go ahead.
SL.
SL, yes.
I have a million different things to say, but up to this point, what I wanted to say was that John Gottman did research about couples, and what he found was that if the couples had fighting styles that were congruent, they stayed together. Like some couples were really conflict avoiders, and they were both conflict avoiders, and they got along. And other couples loved to just hash it out, and they did that. But when couples were mismatched in their fighting styles, that's when they couldn't get through things.
Right. Thank you.
But within that, Cassell, is an assumption that getting along is the goal, because there are lots of couples who don't overtly have conflict, but they also have dead relationships. But I
Well,
wanted to say something else, which is, Lynn, that you brought up Kohut, and you got so far as to talk about narcissistic rage, narcissistic injury. I wanted to go a little farther in the sense of what is the problem, and Kohut talks developmentally about little kids starting out with a grandiosity and then being humiliated.
And even when we talk about trauma, I know I'm going all over the place, but when we talk about trauma, we talk about what happened to somebody and now they feel bad. But to get more specific about how they feel bad, I think shame and humiliation maybe needs to be said, because if you talk about all kinds of conflicts, individual, couple, around the world, political, you talked about Gendlin getting out of Nazi Germany. So talk about Hitler and what he was responding to. And I think it's agreed that it was the humiliation of the German people after the defeat in World War I and the economic misery. Again, I'm everywhere, but the
No.
central concept here is that when people feel humiliated, they
Yeah.
don't have a large range of where to go with that.
Right,
And
exactly.
Frank Lockman talks about that in his book on anger as well. He says that people become violent when that's the only response available to them. It's
Mhm.
come to that.
Right. So that's very helpful, Liz. Humiliation and a child being humiliated, anybody being humiliated, is this injury to the self, to one's self-esteem, to one's self-respect. And there is this urge in people when they feel helpless and traumatized to humiliate the other. And so it isn't just that the person, when I was starting out as a therapist, we just thought, oh, these people had bad parents. If they had had good parents, they would be fine. But it isn't just that they have bad parents that humiliate them, but that we have this issue, this way in which we are as a species, that when we are narcissistically injured, when we're traumatized, that the urge is to humiliate the other. I am part of so many conversations with my peers where people just love to make fun of Trump and even his wife and other people, and there's a kind of joy in it, like it's doing something. And there is that instinct in us of disrespecting and humiliating the other that we feel endangered by. And so we've come to a point, and this is what I'm hoping we'll be able to talk about, where we have to find, how do we deal with that as humans? I think just controlling it doesn't seem to work. But we'll get to that a little later. So, but let's have it right there. Okay. What some of the things that I was thinking of that makes a good fight is when there isn't a winner and a loser, when every voice is heard, or all of the parts of oneself are heard, when someone doesn't have to give up themselves in order to continue the relationship. When we can get to that deeper level where we can be in touch with our vulnerability and at some point share it in some kind of way. I mean, we could probably come up with a lot of different things that we would say, oh, that was a good fight. And maybe all of us have had the experience of a good fight and bad fights. If we want to, I think the whole point is not to separate things into good and bad, but just for for this moment, we could separate a good fight or a bad fight. But how do we get to a place where we can have good fights rather than bad fights, where we can deal with conflict through understanding and healing rather than disengaging, shutting down, or revenge. And those are big issues that I think we need to just be able to talk about and see little pieces by pieces, like Jean was doing in that paper, find some ways of, instead of being disheartened, of finding a little tiny step forward there. I saw this movie the other night because Ellen's helper wanted to see it, of Pleasantville. Did you ever see that movie? Raise your hand if you saw that old movie, Pleasantville. I would recommend seeing it again, if or seeing it for the first time if you haven't. It's this television program of this very pleasant kind of life and this village where everybody is lovely to each other and everything is predictable, and this young guy who sort of longs for that, and miraculously he and his sister get put into this little village, Pleasantville, and as they are interacting with people, and it's all in black and white, as TV was then. And as they're interacting with people and trying not to mess up the system too much, they do mess up the system. And each time somebody is touched by these other possibilities than being very, very controlled, they turn into Technicolor. And it's very charming how you see each of these people turning into Technicolor, usually through sexuality or aggression, like one or the other. And the show stops with them, they're all being in Technicolor, and it being sort of obvious that they can't go on the way they were. And you sort of feel good at the end of the show. Said, they got to a different stage of being human. And they're not doing things exactly the same way. But then I saw that show, and then a few hours later I thought, but then what? Sort of like the show stops, the movie stops right at the point where most of the world is right now. When they turn into Technicolor, they start burning the books, and they start, threatening people. What then? What do we do with the Technicolor? How do we deal with not just being rote and predictable, but
raising her hand.
Oh, good. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you. And with a little something you said earlier, Lynn, about, you're raising these questions, how do we do this?
Mm-hmm.
And you said before, that Jean said this last piece from fitting in to pouring out to relating, but the relating is the growing edge,
Right.
and the evolutionary edge.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that that's where we're at.
Right.
Right. and relating requires some kind of engagement as opposed to an othering and pushing away from, right? Someone mentioned Thomas Hubel's work. I know so many of us are involved in various kinds of spiritually related work. But I am also thinking about Thich Nhat Hanh's interbeingness. And that we are at a place not just about the individual narcissistic rage, and of course it's, you know, what's inside, outside, individual, collective, what you were beginning with with all of the levels of this.
Right.
And maybe part of the work of self-compassion and our individual healing work hopefully takes us to a place that we can be in a greater collective healing work, that it's not about othering as rejecting, but othering that you are similar to, we share something, which then leads to something else. Because if you're talking about Hitler and Germany,
Right.
so on and so forth, it isn't just about, you know, the individual being humiliated, right? It becomes a collective process.
Right.
So I'm interested in this growing edge of what is relating, and are we at a place of such collective desperation that we move into a shift in consciousness.
Right. Thank you, Ruth. That really is very helpful. And that's where I think we need to move in this discussion.
Isn't that sort of where you were, Lynn, with the Technicolor people?
Yes, right.
It's sort of like they got through the so-called pseudo community. They got through everybody putting on a face, and then they got to the real stuff. Well, that's great. So now what?
Yeah, now what? Right.
Now what?
Right. So I want to take up right there, and I want to do a little exercise with you and just see what it does. Okay. So I think where we are, as Ruth pointed out, is in recognizing that we are all interconnected, and that what's inner, outer, that we're systems within systems, and that every little moment is a microcosm of some whole great big thing that we're dealing with, and to find how to engage with each other in a way that we're really taking into account our interconnectedness. I'm quoting a lot of psychoanalysts today. Well, not a lot, just Kohut. And I want to quote Jessica Benjamin, who talks about this idea of going from two, the right and wrong, us and them, the good guys and the bad guys, us and the other, to going to three. And this third is this kind of sense of there's another way beside this and this. I call that, or I have called that, the new us, the sense of the us. And what I'm trying to develop is to extend the revolution that focusing has given us of touching into the felt sense of our own individual experience and seeing how it goes way out there, to being able to touch in and find the us, the felt sense of the us. And the felt sense of the us, we haven't really learned yet to find it, for our consciousness to be able to embrace it. When we can find the felt sense of the us, I think there's a shift. And it's, of course, the same kind of movement that so many spiritual teachings are trying to help us with. But I think focusing gives us a particular, I don't know the word, skill that we can develop to find that.
Mhm.
When we can find the felt sense of the us, we can see something differently. And I want to experiment with that with you. But I want to flag up
Mm.
something else before I experiment with you with that. Can we do that? Can you hold on to that? The felt sense of the us as a step forward. And then I want to share with you where I haven't gone yet, or we haven't gone yet. Or this part of we hasn't gone yet, which is that when we are injured, when that tie is broken of the us, whether it's individual or communal, there is this instinct that Kohut is talking about, this narcissistic rage that Jean talks about as pouring out. That seems much more benevolent than endless hatred and lust for revenge. But there is this instinct to control the other, to get ourselves back by making fun of the other or humiliating the other, or what do we do with that? And this is where a place where I am hoping we can go further, maybe. I think that there are maybe two different aspects of it. One aspect is that after there's some safety and some healing, we can find the felt sense of the us, and we can think about it differently. And that's what I'm going to play with you with today. The other thing, and this is just my growing edge, is that when we have to pour out, or we're feeling the endless hatred, and we're and there's this instinct of aggression, there needs to be community, safe people, and that could be your friends, it could be your partner, your focusing partner, some place where that can be received and it can be detoxified before there's engagement with the other or in some way. So that's where I am in this journey.
Mhm.
But I want to, it sort of helps me to think there are two different things. The instinct that may be the instinct, like when you stub your toe, you have an instinct to say, damn it, or oh fuck, or something, and it just comes out of you, right? How do you make that instinct safe? And this other about after something is calmed a bit, to be able to think of it differently. So I know I'm giving you too much, and I want us also to be able to have a breakout room. But I'm going to ask you just to let these things swim around in your head and take a couple of breaths and think of a conflict in your own life or in the world or in yourself. Any of these stages, any of these circles, a conflict that you're sort of stumped by, or you could think of one in the past or one in the world. What we do is we think of what should be. The other person should do this and this, or they shouldn't have done that and that. And that's our instinct, of course. So any way that it comes, maybe just jot it down. That conflict and where you're stuck in it, or where the world is stuck in it. Raise your hand when you have something there. Give another moment. And let's use this, whatever you think of here, this conflict, as our test case, as something to study, as our specimen to study. And let's breathe and into our bodies, calm ourselves. Feel the safety that Jean teaches us how to feel within ourselves, a home, coming home to ourselves. That conflict isn't everything, it's just a something. And then let's see what happens if we think of this conflict instead of as two, us and them, or me and or this part and this part, as the us. What is this conflict between us? To try to find a name for the conflict. Do you see how we're changing it when we say, what is this conflict? Instead of saying, well, I'm being bullied by so-and-so, or this people is being destroyed by this people, to say, what is this conflict about? To find a name for the conflict and what the us is up against. Is it a conflict of not enoughness to go around? Is it a conflict of historic trauma? Is it a conflict of the too much, too little? Is it a conflict of helplessness? And if you find a name for the conflict.
Hi, Lynn.
Yes.
Hi.
Go ahead.
I named mine Hysteria,
Oh.
and
Great.
I wrote that my conflict is up against layers of history.
Great, great. Anybody else? And what was the process like for you?
Well, we
Yeah,
asking generally or
yeah, please.
well, I first was with fear in thinking about what fear, attack, things that I'm things that put me in conflict with things that are going on today in the world and with me personally in relation to what's happening in the world. And then I just kind of followed it down to why I'm triggered and where I'm stuck. And when you said the background piece, you know, how worked up I get and the hysteria in there and the hysteria out there. And then I, you know, was in touch with my own history and where that's all stemming from and the generations of it.
So it's like broadening it out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. That was good. Actually, it's helpful.
It's the usual way, this is Jessica Benjamin's words again, is the polarization of the doer and done to, and we're trying to find who is the doer and who is the done to, who is at fault, and how they should be different. And then we want to pin our hopes on their either being controlled or being different. But if we don't see it as doer and done to, what, how is that? Anybody else? What happened for you? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm afraid mine is also within the doer and the done. I gave it the name otherness. Thinking of us, just the thought of us, I find it very difficult. We don't have enough practice of that.
Yes,
It's
yeah.
kind of impossible to even wrap my mind around it.
Yes, exactly. Yes, yes. That is such a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Mary's raising her hand.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. So what I'm saying may sound weird.
Yeah.
In me, it feels like there's life force in my body, and there's the body, and the two are sort of like kind of pasted together. And so what impacts one impacts the other. And the thing that gets between them that wants it to be different, often for me, the way I'm seeing it now is the thinking, either my own thoughts or somebody else's, like, this is not acceptable, the somatic, like the bodily lived experience for some reason. And so think about it differently, or have a different strategy, like somehow wanting to make it different. And so thinking is my I've got trouble with thinking, and sometimes I'm friendlier to thoughts and thinking, but some get out of it.
Yeah. It's very interesting, Mary, because the two for you is you and the thinking. And then you're being friendlier to the thinking is like, oh, we have to make friends with the thinking. And that makes the third. That makes there's the thinking here that we're gonna try to make friends with. I don't know if what I said made any sense there, but I think I really got what you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, I got disconnected for a moment there, but my internet. But it's like, wait, can I pull up a seat at the table for thinking, body, life force for all realms of experience?
Yeah,
Then we can all live together.
I like that image of a chair at the table. Can we imagine a chair at the table, or what would have to be for there to be a chair at the table for all of us, or all the differences?
Well, it reminds me of if I'm having tension and fighting with the people who live with me, inside, outside, whatever. But if we all sit down, we go visit a friend, a neighbor, or, we're at a gathering,
Yes.
somehow the tension is diffused. We get along better there.
Yes. Many people have said, well, if people from Mars came down here, and we would all be together. saying, oh my goodness, we humans, we have to stand up for the human race or something like that. I just want to give one more quote from Stephen Mitchell, who says that all pathology is a failure of imagination. It's the thinking, but we have to be calm enough, safe enough to be able to think.
Well,
Let's just have.
can I say one more thing about that imagination?
Sure.
Imagination is the one realm where they all live harmoniously for me.
Yes, that's right. They live harmoniously there. But it takes a lot to unlock imagination, because when we're traumatized, we can't, we can't think that. We can't have imagination. One more comment, and then I want to give you a chance to have breakout rooms.
And Nessie is raising her hand.
Oh,
Well,
yeah. Thank you.
Steve
Thank you
is
so
in there.
much. When you said that, Lynn, throughout your meditation with us to look at the us, I don't know, I got in touch with grief in my body,
Yes.
a lot of grief came up for me, and just memories of all the losses during the pandemic,
Yes.
like all that just popped up. It was very interesting to experience it, But
Yes.
when you said calm enough to be able to think, what I've learned in like the work in somatic therapies that I've been involved in the work with Thomas Hubble, which is very spiritual, ancestral, and collective, is that, and for me, it's been, and kind of what Mary was saying, kind of stirred up, that it's all about creating safety in the body. So it kind of brings up the polyvagal stuff for me, and, the little ladder from Deb Dana in her book Anchored, she makes you check where you are in your nervous system, to befriend your nervous system. And when your nervous system is reacting to the nervous system of another, it's gonna be hell, and and how can we be calm within ourselves to pause when another is saying something that's triggering parts of us? So I just wanted to share with everyone that I was really happy to see that a Hakomi therapist, who's also an internal family systems therapist and also a focusing person, just wrote a book called Hakomi, Internal Family System and Focusing.
Oh, great.
And he merges them. And I've been reading it, and it's like if I found home, like all those three kind of merging. It's so powerful.
Thank you, Nessie.
Yeah.
Steve, you were going to say something.
First of all, thank you for telling me about that book, telling us about that book. I'm going to go search. What I recalled was a particular personal situation, and what I found was that found very useful about giving the conflict, which actually was a situation in which something came up, something was said in a particular context, and I didn't get into a conflict. I avoided my way of handling it was to shut down on some level, or and such. But what I found was that it's easier for most of us, I think, certainly for me, to be thinking about the particular something that was said that I felt oughtn't to have been said, or that kind of thing. But then asking, well, what to call this? And so for me, what I found was that it was about safe belonging, and then it was a situation. It was about a need for safe belonging, and that it was didn't happen. So it was like rug got pulled out from under me, and then it went even a little bit further, was something about belonging with dignity. And so then when that didn't happen, then there was, 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 then my central nervous system went into kind of threat and disappointment and lost and mode in some kind of way. And at that point and at that particular point in time, I don't think I had that safe holding for that moment.
Right.
And yeah. And then of course there were previous traumas from 40 or 50 years before.
Right.
That kind of thing. But that holding environment is terribly important.
Yeah.
And the absence thereof.
Right. So that it feels like there is something important about getting a felt sense of the us, but that something else has to happen first, right? And that's where many of you have come in with different things that can happen, of being in touch with our bodies, of focusing, but that holding environment, the healing has to happen before we can get a felt sense of the us. So I'm cheating in a way to say to you in a focusing exercise, get a felt sense of the us. But this other thing that has to happen first needs to happen with focusing, with community, with Hakomi, with all of these ways that we can settle back into a feeling of self before we can have the imagination to recognize the sense of the us. So I think for you, Steve, you needed to recognize the disappointment, and that's often where conflict gets the most raw, when we're disillusioned and disappointed and shocked at something that felt like it was a holding environment and then it collapsed. And then it may have for the other person too, or coming to this, can we call it a collapsed holding environment? And then what do we do with that? How does it get restored? So I want to give you a chance to talk for at least 12 minutes in I knew we were going to run out of time because it's such a rich and difficult and complex subject. So why don't we go into breakout rooms? Let's just go into partnerships, since we only have like 10 minutes, and then we'll come back. And Jim, you're gonna let everybody go into partnerships, and we'll come back in 10 minutes. Welcome back, everybody.
I would have cheated you, so if you want to fight about it, let's have a conflict right here.
Well, we have it, but it has to be a good fight. Where every voice is heard and there's no winner or loser. So
could I just say to Dorothy that in the chat, people have been asking if she could post that quote from Heinz Cahoot.
Good. Not maybe. Do you have trouble putting it in the chat, Dorothy? I always have trouble with that.
Yeah, I have to take more lessons from Jim to do that, but at some point between Jim and I, we will get it to you. If not this chat, then the next chat.
Okay, so what happened in your breakout rooms? Good.
Lynn?
Yeah, go ahead.
I can say that it's helped a little, it's helped a bit. I've started doing co-focusing with my partner, and we haven't tackled big issues yet, but small issues like how to keep the shoe rack tidy, or you know, like there and do as you said, Lynn, you know, go beneath where the triggers are and sense the vulnerability and speak from there, and then each anchor each other as we go back and forth. So like co-focusing, and it works. You know, there's not there often doesn't end up being any kind of action step or solution offered as would normally happen in an argument. You would lead with that, like, would you please stop leaving tissues everywhere, you know, and do this, do that. You know, it's more like, this is how I this is underneath my anger, and come out with no active solution, but underneath that, the assumption of caring produces its own solution.
Yes, yeah. I think often when we go to what should happen or what needs to happen, and then that comes from the wrong place. Needs to be the relating needs to come really before, and maybe there never will be a this should happen or we're going to do this. The relating needs to be free of that.
But I just wanted to bring that in, because when we talk about the us, it sounds so sort of yummy, and you know, oh, we having this like it's an aspiration or somewhere we need to go. And I'm like, well, wait, there's another side to this thing.
Yeah, let's really mark that, Castle. It's not that the us is such a great thing. I mean, we're stuck with each other as humans, right? But the us is everything. It can be wonderful and it can be terrible, and it can be a terrible suffering and pain. And it's not that the us is idealized, but that when we, even if it's terrible pain, if we recognize that this is a collapsed us, or this is a vicious us, or this is a dead us. But if we recognize what the quality of that is, it can give us a broader perspective.
Whereas a friend of mine said, oh, it's just suffering. She's a Buddhist.
Suffering, yes.
It's just suffering.
Okay, we're going to have our poem, but is there any last thing anybody wants to say before our poem? And we have a lovely little video of Pray for Peace, but you don't have to stay for that if you need to go.
I can say something. Hi.
Sure. Good.
In our group, we didn't have enough time, I felt, but at the end, there was this feeling, not to go into detail, but the fear of loss of connection and the fear of conflict having that loss of connection. So if there's the fear of loss of connection, you don't want to have the conflict because there's the fear of losing the connection. How to have conflict while staying connected.
Right. Yes. And we need to take that fear of the loss of connection very, very serious. Umbilical cord that we can't afford to lose our connections.
Right. Thank you for saying that. Yeah.
Okay. Are we ready with our poem, Dorothy?
Yes. And it is a rather long poem, so I understand if you have to leave, but it's a wonderful poem. Oops. The Human Line by Ellen Bass. Pray for peace. Pray, the Human Line is the collection of her poetry, and Pray for Peace is the specific poem. Pray to whomever you kneel down to. Jesus nailed to his wooden or plastic cross, his suffering face bent to kiss you. Buddha still under the bow tree in scorching heat. Adonai, Allah, raise your arms to Mary, that she may lay her palm on our brows. To Shekinah, Queen of heaven and earth, to Iana in her striped descent. Then pray to the bus driver who takes you to work. On the bus, pray for everyone riding that bus, for everyone riding buses all over the world. Drop some silver and pray. Waiting in line for the movies, for the ATM, for your latte and croissant, offer your plea. Make your eating and drinking a supplication. Make your slicing of carrots a holy act. Each translucent layer of the onion a deeper prayer. To hawk or wolf or the great whale, pray. Bow down to terriers and shepherds or Siamese cats, fields of artichokes and elegant strawberries. Make the brushing of your hair a prayer, every strand its own voice, singing in the choir on your head. As you wash your face, the water slipping through your fingers, a prayer. Water, softest thing on earth, gentleness that wears away rock. Making love, of course, is already prayer. Skin and open mouths, worshiping that skin, the fragile cases we are poured into. If you're hungry, pray. If you're tired, pray to Gandhi and Dorothy Day, Shakespeare, Sappho, Sojourner Truth. When you walk to your car, to the mailbox, to the video store, let each step be a prayer that we all keep our legs, that we do not blow off anyone else's legs or crush their skulls. And if you are riding on a bicycle or a skateboard, in a wheelchair, each revolution of the wheels a prayer as the earth revolves. Less harm, less harm, less harm. And as you work, typing with a new manicure, a tiny palm tree painted on one pearlescent nail, or delivering soda or drawing good blood into rubber cupped vials, twirling pizzas, which each breath in, take in the faith of those who believed when belief seemed foolish, who persevered. With each breath out, cherish. Pull weeds for peace. Turn over in your sleep for peace. Feed the birds, each shiny seed that spills onto the earth. Another second of peace. Wash your dishes. Call your mother. Drink wine. Shovel leaves or snow or trash from your sidewalk. Make a path. Fold a photo of a dead child around your Visa card. Scoop your holy water from the gutter. Gnaw your crust. Mumble along like a crazy person, stumbling your prayer through the streets.
Thank you, Dorothy.